We've all seen the bumper sticker that says, "Why be normal," right? That same mentality exists in the fertile minds of drag racers and has for decades. This video is going to take a look back at a collection of 5 cars, all with completely different power plants, completely different approaches, but with one common denominator. They all outperform people's notions of what they could do. Some of these cars won races, others wowed crowds, and all of them did it in ways no one else dared try. 2 members of this quintet of freaks don't even have pistons. Terry Horde's Samurai Warrior Mazda RX3 is one of them. This single car is the reason why there is no allocation for rotary-powered engines in the NHRA class guide for categories like Stock, Super Stock, and Competition Eliminator. The RX3 raced in the Modified Eliminator category under the Modified Compact class designation. With a tiny 70 cubic inch rotary engine, it was placed in C Modified Compact, and it was so insanely fast against the index of that category, it was forced up to run in B Modified Compact. This is basically the boxing equivalent of making a lightweight fighter fight with the middleweights. Even in B Modified Compact, the car destroyed the next fastest index and won more events and was then moved into the A Modified Compact class, basically taking that same lightweight fighter, now placing him in the ring with light heavyweights. After decimating that class index, he was once again moved up a class, this time to the double A Modified Compact class, and forced to race against turbocharged 4-cylinder cars, and he still managed to have success, leaving the line between 10 and 12,000 RPM and shifting a Doug Nash 5-speed hooked to a Ford 9-inch rear with a gear ratio that supposedly was in the neighborhood of 750. It was among the loudest things anybody who ever saw it heard. Rumor has it the transmission was also underdriven through the first gear or two to help the little rotary engine get the car moving. Terry Horde was a real character, but also a very savvy racer with the wins to back it up in his angry little car. If you open an NHRA class guide today, you will not find any sort of place for a rotary-powered engine, and you can blame Terry Horde and his domination of Modified Compact in the late 70s and early 80s for that. How wild were the 1970s in drag racing? Well, guys could take a 464 cubic inch Chrysler Hemi, stuff a 671 blower on top, and then add a pair of turbochargers and race it in a class called Pro Comp. Not only race it in a class called Pro Comp, but win with it in Pro Comp as well. This is the famed Golden Gator of Al Leitert and Chase Knight. From 1971 through 1982, the aforementioned duo hauled this car from coast to coast and ran it to the delight of fans. Methanol was the fuel, and 60, the number of pounds of pressure headed into the intake manifold of the compound-boosted engine. This car ran mid-sixes at well over 200 miles an hour and did so with reliability despite the most insane menagerie of plumbing perhaps ever seen on a dragster. The layout was simple on paper but wild-looking in practice. The twin Schweitzer turbos fed into a Hillborn injector that then sent fuel and air into the supercharger. As you can see in some photos, there are gauges all over the place to monitor all this business, specifically on the fuel system side. Of course, sorting that mechanical fuel system out was one of the major problems early on in the life of the car, but Leitert and Knight stuck with it, and when they did and figured it out, they had a very competitive program. Many people think this car was short-lived, and they are very wrong. After it was retired, the car was sold to a restaurant in Texas and sat as a static display for many years. Thankfully, it has since been recovered, restored, and is now on display at the Don Garlits Museum of Drag Racing in Ocala, Florida. Al Leitert was in the business of producing precision springs, like we're talking springs down to the thousandths of an inch long to be used in various applications. Knowing this about Leitert makes sense in how he was able to figure out the mechanical side of his car working alongside Chase Knight, who is a legend in his own right. Chase Knight worked for Crane Cams for decades, and over the course of his career became one of the most knowledgeable engine and valve train guys on the planet. He and Leitert were the perfect match to make this complex package work together. These two men and their wild car were a drag racing match made in heaven. In drag racing's awesome formative days through the 1950s, there was no right or wrong way to do anything. If the car was fast, especially if it was the fastest thing ever made to that point, the methods of construction and motivation were unassailable. Such is the case of the famed Bustle Bomb, the first car to break 150 miles an hour in the quarter mile. This sketchy, by modern standards anyway, monster had an Oldsmobile engine up front and a Cadillac engine out back. Built by a talented group of partners that all worked in the aviation industry, the car employed a tubular chassis and many basic principles still used in modern chassis building today. The mechanical layout of the car was very interesting and particularly complex for the era in which it was built. For instance, the front engine was hooked to a Ford transmission, which would use second and third gear on a run. The Cadillac engine that was in the rear, well, that was a direct drive engine hooked directly to the pinion of the rear axle, but not in the way you'd think. The car would leave the starting line with the Olds engine up front, and then about 2 seconds into the run, the Cadillac engine would roar to life, its throttle blades would be opened at a measured rate by hydro check valves, and the results were amazing right out of the gate. On the very first day it ran in Santa Ana, California, the car cracked 140 miles an hour, placing it into incredibly rarefied territory at that point. Sure, they had some teething problems, like the rear engine failing to shut off, but they knew they had a winner on their hands if they stuck with it. On gasoline, the car was flirting with 150 miles an hour on a weekly basis. Knowing that they had one of the fastest cars in the nation, Lloyd Scott and his crew loaded up and went to the 1955 World Series of Drag Racing in the dream of breaking the world record to that point. With nitromethane in the tank, the car went 151 miles an hour, becoming the first thing to ever break the 150 mile an hour barrier in the sport's nascent history. Many of you will say it was Art Arfons that did it first, but in fact it was Arfons that broke the barrier first in an NHRA national event, but it was Lloyd Scott and the Bustle Bomb that did it first, regardless of sanction. Making 9-second runs at over 150 miles an hour before being torn down and rebuilt in 1956 and early 1957 proved that the car's unorthodox look was effective. In rebuilt form, with some extra refinements, the car went as fast as 164 miles an hour before Lloyd Scott lost his life from injuries sustained in a dirt bike crash before the end of the 1962 season. The most wantonly bizarre car on this list is the U.S. Turbine 1 dragster, owned by a man named, get this, Fling Trailer. Weighing a total of 710 pounds and powered by a Turbine rocket drag axle, the car was thought to be undrivable. Constructed by Frank Hughesart Race Car Specialties using the best of the best in parts and engineering, it was the sheer violence of the rocket drag axle firing off and blazing the tires that caused 9 other drivers to try and fail to get this car to the finish line. Trailer was one bad day away from conceding that the project was a failure, and he was literally prepared to ship the whole car to the Smithsonian Institution and give up. Being in the depths of his despair, it was one last chance given to a man named George the Stone Age Man Hutchison that would change Trailer's fortune and the fortunes of the U.S. Turbine 1. Hutchison was the foreman at Race Car Specialties where the machine was built. He went through it with a fine-tooth comb and understood every working inch of the race car before he got in it to drive. As it turns out, he was the perfect man for the job. During a private test session on the first day he drove the car, the Stone Age Man went more than 200 miles an hour at Lyons Drag Strip, settling Trailer's fears, and it was game on. Remember, this car is wheel, not thrust-driven, and powered by an unthrottleable turbonique rocket drag axle. It required nerves of steel and skills leagues beyond that to actually succeed behind the wheel. Once the car was able to make successive runs, Hutchison hit the road and barnstormed with it. Restricted on what tracks it could run on, the going wasn't always smooth, but McGuire's Wax sponsored the car and it was featured in its advertising. The machine's crowning and most controversial moment came at the 1969 PDA meet held at Lyons Drag Strip. Blazing the tires, shooting fire, and the car emitting its signature Banshee wail, the machine finished the run to a reported speed of 250 miles an hour. Why was this controversial? Well, it was far faster than the car had ever gone, and the run came a full 6 years before Don Garlitz went 250 in his Top Fuel dragster. So the question remains, did it actually go 250? The answer will never likely be known. But the fact of the matter is, on very good runs, the car could keep pace with top fuel dragsters of the day. It was not long after that 1969 PDA race that Trailer decided to park the car, its legacy having been cemented in drag racing history. Trailer then had the Turbonique rocket drag axle removed and replaced with a fuel-burning Hemi, and the Sandman top fuel dragster was born. It was run by Harry Hibbler and Trailer for a couple of seasons after that. The U.S. Turbine 1 is among the most amazing forgotten drag cars of all time. Hutchison, a legendary driver who made a career out of taming the impossible. So far, we've had a rotary, a Hemi with compound boost, a pair of V8s, and a rocket drag axle-powered car. What's next? How about a turbine-powered top fuel dragster? You've likely heard the old tired drag strip joke about a guy who built a front-engine jet car, right? Well, these photos should probably end the yucks regarding that dumb joke. You're looking at the Green Monster number 19 from the Arfons family of Ohio. The car was built in 1971. Art Arfons buying the Woody Gilmore chassis of Ohio top fuel ace Jim Walter, and instead of installing a blown Hemi, he had his teenage son Tim install a T58 turbine engine. This 1,000-plus horsepower shaft turbine engine ran through a gear reduction box, ultimately sending its power to the rear axle, where all the heat and fire was shot out of a vertical stack in front of the driver. Few cars in drag racing history have looked more insane than this one. The T58 turbine was ironically purchased from Art Arfons' former blood rival in the land speed racing wars, Craig Breedlove. Finishing construction in late 1971, Ted Austin was named as the first driver because, frankly, Tim was too young to do it. Now, naturally, you're you're asking and wondering where they would race this car at. Art Arfons had long wanted an actual competition car, something that he could race side by side beyond mere drag strip exhibitions. The NHRA wouldn't budge on his program, but the AHRA and IHRA both decided to allow this turbine-powered car into Top Fuel Eliminator. The first race they would run would be Rockingham, North Carolina in late 1971, and while not a disaster, the 180-mile-an-hour speeds were not close to qualifying in Top Fuel. When Tim Arfons reached his 16th birthday, he was handed the keys, allowed to test the car, ran over 180 miles an hour, and named the de facto driver. Now, this car was run as a Top Fuel entry and a jet car exhibition machine through the mid-1970s. By the time the 1974 and 75 timeframe rolled around, the car was capable of qualifying at some of the national events it attended. It was also running over 200 miles an hour. It was also in the same time period that Art Arfons shifted his focus to the world of tractor pulling, and with it, Tim's went as well. The young speed demon was admittedly frustrated at the time as he loved driving the dragster and the speed that came with it, but tractor pulling became a safer and more profitable enterprise for the Arfons family at that time. Tim missed the car so much he actually recreated it from scratch 10 years ago. And not only did he recreate the car, he took it racing again, running over 200 miles an hour with ease. No, this car never won a Top Fuel race, but it won many open jet shows and put on a whale of a display wherever it ran with its young driver and small crew. Weird? 100%. Awesome? By the truckload. The recreated Green Monster 19 was sold to a man in Europe a few years ago. So if you want to see it live in action anymore, buy a plane ticket. And there you have it. 5 of the most interestingly different drag cars of all time. There's hundreds of these gems out there, and I love investigating their history and sharing it with you. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more automotive, racing, and historical content.